Welcome back to the High Impact Communication Program, and in this session we are going to be covering the importance of verbal communication and how you can enhance your verbal skills. When we talk about verbal communication, we are essentially talking about words and sentences that we either speak or write. Now, more than the words that we use, it's how we use them that's actually important. The four factors that we would cover in verbal communication are A, precision, B, fluency, C, brevity, and D, expansiveness. So let's take them one by one and see what we can do with them. Precision. What does the word mean? Well, the dictionary says it means to be exact, which means when you're communicating with me or I with you, what you have in your mind should be more or less what I have in my mind. And that's when we say it's precise communication. So if in my mind I had some view, but when I communicated it to you, you felt it differently, it is not precise communication. And that's the beginning of what we call miscommunication. So how do I explain this? So let's say I have something in my mind. I want to tell my wife that, how important spending time with her is. So the intentions are good. But while I'm saying it, the words that I use convey a different meaning or are open to a different kind of interpretation. And you remember from the previous session we spoke about semantic noise. Let's say I use terms that could be interpreted differently, irrespective of how great my intentions were. What if she were to perceive this in an entirely different manner? And instead of having the relationship grow stronger, what if it were to actually start drifting apart because of the way that I'm communicating? Precise communication. Whether it's your personal life, whether it's a professional life. I mean, talking about professional life, imagine if you're talking to a client and the client actually understands something totally different from what you really wanted to say. It could be a lost deal, it could be a lost relationship, it could be anything. And none of that would be really good. So I think not too many people would argue with the fact that precise communication is important. But there are people who might actually ask, so why is it that precise communication doesn't happen? Well, I can think of a couple of reasons. I'm sure you could think of many more. One, people think in the language that they're most comfortable with. So let's say if I were born in a family where English is the first language, and if I have learned to communicate in English from a very early age, then even when I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking in English. So when I am speaking to someone, I don't have to translate what I thought into a different language, especially if I'm communicating in the same language, which is English. But let's say there is a person who comes from either a state in India or a different country where English is not the first language. What would happen in those cases is that the person would first think in their native tongue or their native language in their mind, and then when they have to verbalize this with other people, they would translate that into English. And in that translation, the intent gets lost. And what the other person sees, hears, perceives is completely different. The result? Miscommunication. So one of the reasons we're saying is because maybe, the language that we think in may not be the language that we're speaking in. The second could be because we are not using appropriate words, and that is where fluency gets in. So when you talk about a person being fluent, what you're really saying is two things. One, how smoothly does the person talk? So is the person clear in what he's saying, or are there a lot of breaks in the way he or she is talking? The other aspect of fluency is your vocabulary. So irrespective of which language you're talking about, in this case we're talking about English communication, the vocabulary that you have, the repository of words that exist in your mind related to that language would define how fluent you are. Let's say I'm talking to someone, I'm talking to a factory worker, and I'm using the term compensation or commission with the factory worker. In my mind, I probably mean the money that the person gets at the end of the month from the company. But then commission is not something that you pay to a factory worker. What you pay to a factory worker is wages. I wouldn't say how much commission have you got today to a doctor. What the doctor gets is a professional fee. So wages, salary, professional fee, commission, emoluments, honorarium, while loosely they might mean the same thing more or less, but technically they're very different. So the more appropriate term or words that you use, the more precise your communication would be. Coming back to fluency, how do I build my fluency? Well, I remember my primary school teacher back in Dehradun telling me that a great way of building vocabulary was to pick up 3 new words from a dictionary, listing them out on a piece of paper, and then trying to apply them the very next day. And if you do that day after day, well, you have a very vast repository of words. And that's the easiest way that I can figure out in terms of how to improve your vocabulary. Fluency in terms of smoothness is something which may require a little more effort. So you have something called a dictaphone these days, and dictaphones are pretty inexpensive to come by. All you need to do is buy a dictaphone, pick up a book, preferably a novel, so that has scope for exciting stuff that you can read out. Read it in a loud voice, try and capture the emotions that are there in the book, in the scenes that you are going to be narrating, and record yourself. Then play the recording back to you, and you will find how smoothly you were talking. So you'll be able to identify patterns where the smoothness factor is not being controlled. And once you know what those factors are, you can then control them, you can address them. So we've done precision and fluency. The third and the fourth elements are what are called brevity and expansiveness. So what is brevity? Simply put, it means being brief. What is expansiveness? Again, expansiveness is where you are elaborating on something, so you're actually being descriptive. Now, a lot of people ask me in my seminars, how is it that two such dissimilar concepts are both equally important? I mean, you can either be brief or you can be expansive. So which of it is it that you want us to be? My point is, it's situational. So in some situations, you might actually need to be brief, whereas in others, you might need to be more descriptive, more elaborate. The other thing is, when should I be brief? When should I be expansive? Most people make the mistake of getting expansive when it's something important or critical that they have to communicate. Why is it a mistake? Look, the more important or the more critical the item that you are communicating, the more imperative it is that the person understands it. And what happens is when you keep talking in circles, when you get expansive, there is a chance that the person might actually lose the sense of what you want to convey. So my recommendation would be as follows. The more critical the communication, the more brief you should be. Follow the bullet approach. So if you have 5 things to say, give them in brief. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You may have noticed that's the approach I've been following with you during the course of this program. Once you've used brevity, use that other concept from the communication process that we discussed, which is feedback. Ask the person, what is their understanding of these 5 things that you just told them? Now it's possible that out of that item 1, 2, and 3 might be clear to them. Let that go. Be brief there. 4th and 5th item, there may be some confusion still. Those are the items you should actually get expansive on, elaborate on. So what I'm really recommending, I guess, is a greater balance between brevity and expansiveness. And of course, the other thing was that the more critical the thing, the more brief you are. Wherever the person has not understood it, you get into expansive mode.